In previous videos, we discussed all of the coolest and strongest monsters that evolved into Fusion, Synchros, and Xyz monsters, and how their particular upgrade fared in the competitive metagame, or how they managed to reference or call back to their original counterparts. So in this video, we're going to cover some of the best Pendulum Evolutions in the game, the ideas and themes they represent, and why they managed to see competitive play. And swinging into number 10, we have Odd Eye's Revolution Dragon, the ultimate evolved form of Odd Eye's Dragon and Odd Eye's Pendulum Dragon, while also being the good aligned counterpart to Supreme King Zark, since it's a combination of all four of the original Dimension Dragons. However, Revolution Dragon doesn't have too much in common with the Dimension Dragons or Odd Eye's Dragon, with its effect being more in line with the Odd Eye's Pendulum Dragon. Revolution Dragon's effect as a scale prevents you from pendulum summoning monsters other than dragon monsters, but allows you to target and reborn any dragon, fusion, synchro, or Xyz monster in your graveyard if you're willing to destroy Revolution Dragon in the scale. This is similar to how the Odd Eye's Pendulum Dragon's effect is used, allowing you to destroy the card as a scale in order to gain some kind of advantage. In the case of Revolution, it's a revive, and in the case of Odd Eyes, it's a search of any pendulum monster with 1500 or less attack. Revolution Dragon also has an effect to search, but that effect is tied to its monster effect instead, making it so that if you pay 500 life points and discard it from your hand to your graveyard, you can add any level 8 or lower dragon pendulum monster from your deck to your hand. However, unlike its unevolved form, Revolution Dragon can't be normal summoned or set and must be pendulum summoned out, or special summoned from the hand by attributing a fusion, synchro, or Xyz monster, which is a reference to the other Odd Eyes counterparts, Starving Venom Fusion Dragon, Clear Wing Synchro Dragon, and Dark Rebellion Xyz Dragon, all of which were used by yugioh to bring out Revolution Dragon in the strongest duelist yugioh manga. This is a huge investment of resources, but if you manage to bring Revolution to the field, it gains attack and defense equal to half of your opponent's life points, and even has a field wipe, allowing you to pay half your life points so that you can shuffle back all of the cards from the field and graveyard into the deck on a soft once per turn. Now, these two monster effects are somewhat unique and don't really call back to Revolution's original forms in some ways. There's no damage modification that can apply like the original Odd Eyes cards, and the three other Dimension Dragons aren't really given representation. But fans of the Arc 5 anime manga have already realized that a lot of the Revolution Dragon's design is done in order to mirror and contrast its dark counterpart, Supreme King Zark. This is apparent to both in their opposing attribute scales and even in their names, since a Supreme King is the opposite of a Revolution. But these differences also shine through in the way the particular effects work. Zark can destroy the field for free, but Revolution requires you to pay half your life points if you want to shovel everything back. Zark's main pendulum effect is based around restricting actions of the extra deck monsters, while Revolution Dragon's pendulum effect is based around supporting them, if you're willing to destroy it. And Zark's second pendulum effect exists to punish your opponent for searching, while Revolution Dragon allows you to sacrifice it and pay 500 life points in order to search your deck. This theme of sacrifice is omnipresent in the Odd Eyes archetype, and a lot of different cards being based around gaining advantage from destroying your own Odd Eyes monsters. This is supposed to be representative of yugioh's courage as he's willing to sacrifice his own well-being for the sake of others, which is exactly what the original Odd Eyes Pendulum Dragon does. It sacrifices itself so that the other monsters can be added to the hand, and this is actually the main reason why the card saw a ton of competitive success as a staple of Pendulum strategies in slower formats, since they could use Odd Eyes as a consistency tool for a ton of different playmakers, with it being really notable in Duelist Alliance format being able to add a Qliphort Scout to the hand. And funnily enough, Revolution Dragon actually carries the idea to the modern age, because while its search effect has a different pool of monsters to grab from, it's still generic enough to be used in a ton of different strategies that use Pendulum Dragon monsters like Dracoslayers and Dragon Link, two decks that are willing to sacrifice Revolution Dragon to search for their playmakers, or to destroy to bring back those playmakers from the graveyard, which really does manage to keep the original ideas of Odd Eyes alive, and allows for yugioh's courage to be represented in a more modern meta. Revolution Dragon is jam-packed with a ton of different references and concepts that have been borrowed from other cards, and it manages to keep the spirit of Odd Eyes alive while being a genuinely great card that sees a solid amount of competitive play with its specific niche specifically because of the willingness to sacrifice itself, which isn't bad for a card that's originated in a spin-off manga designed to teach children how to play the game. And shining at number 9 is Zefraath, the direct evolution of Shadow Zefraath, whose original form is actually Gemnite Crystal, after having been fused, corrupted, uncorrupted, and then given the power of the Zefra by the Natura Sacred Tree. And Zefraath and Shadow Zefraath, after it was chosen to wield the power of the secret 11th Zefraath in order to take on Tiara, Source of Destruction. While Zefraath was Shadow Zefraath, its pendulum effect was the same as every other of the 10 original Zefra, locking you into only being able to pendulum summon out Zefra monsters and monsters of their associated archetype, with Zefraath locking you to only being able to pendulum summon out Shadows and Zefras. And as a monster, it has one effect that can be activated whenever it's pendulum summoned to reference its Zefraath, or whenever it's sent to the graveyard, just like a Shadow monster. And this effect lets you summon a Zefra card from your pendulum zone other than another copy of Zefraath. Meanwhile, Zefraath actually has an upgraded version of this effect as part of its monster effect, allowing you to tribute a monster on a soft once per turn in order to special summon any Zefraath monster from your deck. But if you want to use this effect, you need to bring Zefraath to the field, which is fairly difficult because it can't be normal, pendulum, or special summon in any other way, other than from the extra deck by tributing all monsters you control, including at least 3 Zefraath monsters, pretty much meaning that your other monsters have to give up their Zefraath cores in order to bring out Zefraath. If you do manage to special summon it, you get to perform an extra pendulum summon of Zefraath monsters in addition to your usual pendulum summon, which is actually an incredibly powerful effect, but one that isn't used often because Zefraath is so difficult to summon. However, the reason why Zefraath was so competitively viable, thankfully had nothing to do with its monster effect, and was all to do with its amazing pendulum effect that put Zefraath on the map both as a deck and as an engine. Because in this scale, Zefraath is basically pendulum treasure for Zefraaths, allowing you to put any Zefraath monster from your deck face up in your extra deck, then Zefraath's scale becomes the same as that sent monsters. Like its monster effect, this effect is meant to represent Zefraath's mastery over the Zefraath cores, since it gives you a roundabout way of accessing any of the chosen 10 Zefraath monsters, giving you whatever scale you need at any given time and allowing you to access the noble Zefraath Saber, the majestic Zefraath Wendy, or even the reformed Zefraath Saiton. But more often than not, Zefraath has been used competitively to grab out one particular Zefraath core, Zefraath Niu, Secret of the Yang Xing. Because whenever Zefraath Niu is pendulum summoned or destroyed by battle card effect, it allows you to add any Yang Xing or Zefraath spell or trap card from your deck to your hand. This has allowed for Zefraath to set up some pretty nasty back row interruption, and this gives the deck access way too easily to Zefraath War, Zefraath Divine Strike, and even 9 Pillars of the Yang Xing. And because Zefraath differentiates itself from other Zefraath monsters by not having every restriction on its pendulum effect, you could use Zefraath, Oracle of Zefraath, and Zefraath Niu as an engine piece in order to get a free body, a free search, and a really solid scale. Funnily enough, Zefraath being playable thanks to a Yang Xing monster actually mirrors the lore perfectly, as it was the Yang Xing monsters that manifest the 11th Zefraath core, which chose Shadow Zefraath core as its host, which is honestly really cute that Zefraath's flavor matches its gameplay. Which is also true of its monster effects and summoning condition, because the Zefraath was a combination of the Sacred Tree's efforts to take on Tiara, and so put all the Zefraath cores that were originally gifted to the other Zefraath monsters into one being in order to supercharge them to give enough strength to take on a god. This is also why Zefraath core's summoning condition is so difficult. It's literally asking you to take the cores from at least 3 Zefraath monsters and put them into Zefraath. But in doing so, you have to pave the way for a brighter future for your other Zefraath monsters, giving them another opportunity to fight back by letting you perform a second pendulum summon. These effects are powerful in their own ways, but they're also quite unique and don't really reflect the ideas and themes of Zefraath core or any of its other previous counterparts, but instead represents their complete ascension to a whole new power level that's capable of taking on destruction itself. Which likely showcases that while the body that was used was Gemnite Crystal, the will of Zefraath is heavily influenced by the Zefraath cores, the Sacred Tree, and Sophia, which is why it's the only Zefraath monster not to belong to another archetype. But even in spite of that, Gemnite Crystal is still in there, because even though Zefraath's effective summon from the deck is rarely used, it's really similar to Zefraath core's effective summon out from the Pendulum Zone, which shows that Zefraath is still the same person as core, just super powered to take on Tiara. And after clearing a path by defeating Tiara, Gemnite Crystal does end up getting his happy end. Both as an engine and as a deck, Zefraath has seen a lot less competitive play in recent years due to a ton of different factors, which is honestly a shame, because a ton of the Zefraath cards showcase a ton of interesting lore and flavor of the story and even how they play. And nowhere is that more apparent than in Zefraath, the card which makes the archetype function while also being an amazing conclusion to one part of the Dual Terminal saga. And slaying into number 8 is Master Pendulum, the Dracoslayer, who is actually Luster Pendulum after having gained the powers of the Ignite, Dynamist, and Magispector tribes, preparing to take on Vector Pendulum and as a Morphage army. Luster Pendulum scale effect allows you to, on a soft once per turn, destroy a card in your other Pendulum Zone and then add a card with the same name as that card you destroyed from your deck to your hand. But as a monster, Luster's effect is actually just a big downside because it prevents you from using Luster as material for the special summon of a Fusion, Synchro, or Xyz monster other than for a Dracoslayer monster. This effect is actually dropped completely in Master Pendulum because it doesn't have any effect at all, making the snippet of lore within its effect text technically a straight upgrade from its unevolved form, since it allows Master Pendulum to be used as Fusion, Synchro, and Xyz materials for non-Dracoslayer monsters. Meanwhile, as a scale, Master allows you to target and destroy one card in either player's Pendulum scale. Master Pendulum as both a monster and as a scale is supposed to represent how far Luster Pendulum has come in this particular journey to take on Vector Pendulum, his evil counterpart. As a monster, Master Pendulum has gained a greater mastery over Dragon Alchemy, and is more capable of being able to turn into a non-Dracoslayer monster as a result. And as a scale, Master's effect is meant to be a much more precise version of Luster's effect, Because while it doesn't net you any sort of card advantage, it allows you to destroy cards in your opponent's pendulum scales rather than your own, making it a way to deal with your opponent's pendulum scales. This is because Master Pendulum, according to the flavor text, has gained an understanding that their powers is similar to Vector's and the Draco Fiends, and Vector's Dragon Alchemy is based around negating an opponent's pendulum scales. But regardless of lore, the strong aspects of Luster and Master is that they both allow you to pop a card in your pendulum scale. This is great for a ton of different pendulum strategies, because you can fill up your extra deck with bodies to pendulum summon out later while also triggering any on destruction effects. This ended up being the basis behind the tier 0 Pepe strategy in Draco Pals, where Dracoslayer saw play as an engine with Draco face-off since they could just destroy cards like Plushfire with your pendulum scale to get advantage, and allow the deck to access the Dracoslayer extra deck monsters, which were basically just excellent extenders that you could then use for rank 8 plays. And in these strategies, Master Pendulum not having the same restriction as Luster was actually a decent benefit because it meant that if you summoned out Master, you weren't limited to only bringing out Dracoslayers, and you could use it to go into any of your other rank 4s. It being normal also meant that Rescue Rabbit could see playing the strategy, allowed you to summon out 2 Master Pendulums at a time for an instant rank 4 or Dynastar power. It's strange to see that an effect monster can evolve or improve by losing its effect and becoming a normal monster, but Master Pendulum's evolution gave it a ton of interest and utility that Luster Pendulum didn't have. And setting example number 7 is Magical Abductor, a member of Endymion's forces who is the unevolved form of Magical Something, but the evolved form of Magical Exemplar. As Magical Exemplar, she has 2 effects. Her first effect makes it so that each time a spell card is activated, you must place 2 spell counters on Exemplar after the spell card resolved. And her second effect allows you to put those spell counters to good use, letting you remove any number of spell counters from her to special summon a spellcaster monster from your hand or graveyard with a level equal to the number of spell counters you removed. As a pendulum monster, Magical Abductor's effects are actually still really similar to its original counterpart, and allow you to gain a ton of advantage off the use of spell counters both as a monster and a spell card. In the pendulum scale, Magical Abductor has 2 effects. The first to gain you only 1 spell counter after a spell card is resolved, and the second, which allows you to, on a soft once per turn, remove 3 spell counters from it to add any pendulum monster in the game from your deck to your hand. Meanwhile, as a monster, Abductor has the same effect as its scale to gain a spell counter after a spell card resolves, and has a secondary soft once per turn effect that allows you to remove 3 spell counters, but this effect lets you add any level 1 spellcaster monster from your deck to your hand. She also has a bonus effect too, which allows her to gain an extra 100 attack per spell counter on the card. Both of these effects are really cool plays on the original Magical Exemplar, as they're both designed either around supporting spellcaster monsters and other magical arts. As a monster, this support is really explicit and allows you to search your deck for any level 1 spellcaster you can need. The most common targets for this in the modern era include Jester Confit as an extender, and Magician's Souls to draw a ton of cards. But this effect has a wide range of utility, with some other great targets being Effect Veiler, 5 Rainbow Magician, and even Drone Lockbird. As a pendulum scale, Abductor's effect doesn't support spellcasters specifically, but instead has a much more generic effect that allows you to search for any monster that's gained the power of Pendulum. Both of these effects allow for Abductor to see a chunk of competitive success as an amazing generic tool for just about any pendulum strategy, because it's really easy to give Magical Abductor the 3 spell counters necessary for her search since pendulum scales count as spell cards. This has meant that Abductor has seen play in a ton of different strategies throughout the years, both in non-spellcaster focused decks like Draco Pals and Metal Foes for her powerful scale effect, and in spellcaster focused decks for Endymion and Pendulum Magician, which can take advantage of Abductor as both a scale and as a monster. As an evolution, Magical Abductor is an amazing upgrade from its original counterpart that still keeps the same idea of using spell counters to gain advantage in some way, allowing for the ideas behind Magical Exemplar to be present in more than just spell counter based strategies like Endymion. And speaking of Endymion, counting down into number 6 is Endymion, the Mighty Master of Magic, the pendulum evolution of Endymion, the Master Magician, after gaining greater mastery over the use of spell counters and unlocking the power of the pendulum. The original Endymion is a level 7 spellcaster that you can special summon out from your hand by removing 6 spell counters from a magical city of Endymion that you control. And if you summon it with this method, you get to target any spell card in your graveyard and add it to your hand. It also has a second on-field effect that, on a soft once per turn, lets you discard any spell card to use Endymion's magic to target a card in the field and destroy it. Now, Mighty Master actually has a ton of similar effects to its original counterpart, despite how much more complex it is. In the pendulum scale, Mighty Master can summon itself out from the pendulum zone by removing 6 spell counters from anywhere on the field. Then you get to destroy cards in the field up to the number of spell counters you removed. And after that, you then get to place spell counters onto Endymion equal to the number of cards you destroyed, letting you use Endymion's magic in a new age. Mighty Master can even let you add any normal spell card from your deck to your hand if it happens to be destroyed by battle as a monster, just like how the original Endymion let you add any spell card from your graveyard whenever it was summoned by its own effect. But just like with Magical Abductor, Endymion's use of spell counters has grown a lot more proficient, and as a result, he's gained a few new effects. As a monster, Endymion can't be targeted or destroyed by your opponent's card effects, and if a spell or trap card or effect is activated, you can use Endymion's quick effect to return a card with a spell counter that you control to your hand to negate the activation of that card and destroy it, and then put counters onto Endymion equal to the number of spell counters that card you return your hand had. These new effects showcase that not only has Endymion mastered magic to such a degree that he can protect himself, but he can counter an opponent's spell as well. But it's all of these effects together that made Mighty Master the premier boss monster of its own Pendulum archetype, Endymion. A deck dedicated to flooding the field with a ton of spell counters by using a bunch of different spell cards and to abuse the explosive effects of the Endymion monsters. And because it's so easy to gain a ton of spell counters, Endymion is insane as both an end board piece and as a form of removal, letting you negate an opponent's spell and trap card as a monster, or by wiping up to 6 cards your opponent controls when placed in the scale, letting you use Mighty Master in a similar way to how you might have used your original counterpart as a removal tool, just a lot more beefed up and easier to use. Endymion is an amazing example of an evolution done right. It's an amazing upgrade of its original counterpart that takes every one of its effects and amps it up to 11 to make it truly worthy of the title of a boss monster. And it does this all while keeping the same spirit and ideas from its original form alive. And at number 5, we have Chaos Emperor Dragon, the Dragon of Armageddon. The Pendulum upgraded one of the most iconic and feared monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh's history, Chaos Emperor Dragon and Void of the End. The original Chaos Emperor Dragon couldn't be normal summon or set, but could be special summon by banishing one light and dark monster from a graveyard, and was famous for its devastating game-ending effect, which allowed you to pay 1,000 life points in order to make both players send all cards from their hand and field to the graveyard, then inflict 30 damage to your opponent for each card sent to the graveyard in this way. Back in 2004, this effect didn't have any kind of restriction on it, which meant that you could use the effect of Chaos Emperor Dragon while you controlled a Sangan or Witch of the Black Forest in order to add Yada Garasu from your deck to your hand to set up the infamous Yada log. But in the modern era, Chaos Emperor Dragon received an errata that made it so you couldn't activate any other cards or effects that turn you use the effect of Chaos Emperor Dragon, which pretty much made it a shadow of its former self that'll likely never see competitive play again because of how awkward it is to use. Thankfully though, the Pendulum Chaos Emperor manages to recapture some of its original former glory. Chaos Emperor cannot be normal summoned or set, it must be special summoned from your hand or extra deck by banishing light and dark monsters from your graveyard, but you can only summon Chaos Emperor Dragon once per turn this way. Then, once it's on the field, you can pay half your life points to send as many cards as you control as possible, other than cards in the extra monster zone, to the graveyard. Then you can send cards your opponent controls to the graveyard equal to the number of cards you sent to the grave. And instead of going to the graveyard, a special summoned Chaos Emperor Dragon returns to the bottom of the deck once it leaves the field. As a scale though, Chaos Emperor's effect is actually pretty unique and works really well with the Chaos strategies, allowing you to target a banished dragon, add it to your hand while destroying Chaos Emperor in the process, and putting it into your extra deck face up. Now, it is really cute that Pendulum Chaos Emperor's monster's effect is based entirely as a variation off of the original Chaos Emperor, but even though Pendulum Chaos Emperor's effect is a decent form of removal, it still doesn't compare to the almighty power of the unerratted Chaos Emperor Dragon, since it's more difficult to use, doesn't hand loop your opponent, and isn't even a guaranteed wipe of their entire field. When the original Chaos Emperor came into the field, it stayed true to its name as a signifier of the end times, as it pretty much meant you were winning the duel. The new Chaos Emperor Dragon can technically be used in a similar fashion as a way to close out games, but it's definitely a lot weaker as a boss monster. But even though Pendulum Chaos Emperor only captures a fraction of Chaos Emperor Dragon's power as a monster, most of the card's strength is actually in its Pendulum effect, because this effect allows you to gain free follow-up and card advantage in Chaos Attribute Dragon decks, and is why Chaos Emperor Dragon is a common feature in a deck like Dragon Link and Bestial Control, two non-Pendulum decks that really value the effects to recur the dragons after they've been banished by a Chaos Baby, or by the effects of a Bestial. And even though this ends up destroying Chaos Emperor in the process, you don't lose anything from this effect because you can still summon it out from your face-up extra deck to the extra monster zone, or a zone on link monster points to, making it an amazing extender. Chaos Emperor might not be as strong of a boss monster as its original counterpart, but its monster effect is still a cool smile and a reminder of one of the most terrifying monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh's history. And while its role as an extender is a lot different to how Chaos Emperor Dragon was used, it still carries on the legacies of Chaos and Armageddon with it in a new form more suited for the modern day. And bringing us back to the Endymion lore at number 4 is Mythical Beast Jackal King, the boss monster of the Pendulum Mythical Beast archetype, which is actually an entire archetype composed of Pendulum Evolutions and Mythical Beast Jackal after being heavily experimented on by the Mythical institution. True to its role in the lore, the original Jackal's two effects are based around assisting to and enabling the other Mythical Beast Pendulum monsters. Its scale effect can only be activated if you don't have another card in your Pendulum zone, It allows you to target a card in the field that you can place a spell counter on and place one spell counter on it while destroying Jackal in the process. But as a monster, Jackal has an effect that allows it to gain a spell counter each time a spell card resolves. And if you manage to rack up 3 spell counters, you can remove those counters and tribute Jackal to summon out any Mythical Beast monster from your deck. Now, because every Mythical Beast monster is part Jackal, their scale effects are really similar to the original counterpart, allowing you to destroy the card in the scale in order to gain some advantage or using cards that can gain spell counters. In the case of Jackal King, its scale effect lets you destroy it, and if you have no cards in your other Pendulum zone, then you can special summon out any Mythical Beast Pendulum monster from your extra deck other than Jackal King himself. And as a monster, Jackal King has an effect to gain 2 spell counters after a spell card is resolved, and a quick effect that lets you put those counters to good use, because whenever your opponent activates a monster effect, you can remove 2 counters from Jackal King to negate the activation and destroy the card. This monster effect is the reason most strategies saw competitive value in Jackal King, because if you can bring it to the field and activate any spell card or pendulum scale, you got an amazingly strong monster negate to act as interruption during your opponent's turn. This made Jackal King a really great tool in a ton of different pendulum strategies from the likes of Endymion, Pendulum Magician, and even to some Metal Foes builds. Jackal King's scale effect was also a really strong tool too, and formed the basis of a really tight and compact Mythical Beast engine, where you'd want to play 3 Master Cerberus in order to search out Jackal King, then use the effect of Jackal King to summon up Master Cerberus from the extra deck to put a free bot on board while preparing Jackal King to be pendulum summoned out of your next deck later. The cute thing about this particular effect is that it actually mirrors its original Jackal form, because while Jackal's monster effect allows you to summon a monster from your deck, Jackal King's scale effect summons out from your extra deck, which is actually a really neat evolution of the original effect, which shows a greater strength and power of Pendulum, while its new monster effect showcases just how strong the Jackal's magic has become. Jackal King is an amazing boss monster and one that puts Mythical Beasts on the map as an engine for other Pendulum decks to use because of its great negate and scale effect that was inspired by its original form. And despite Jackal seeing less play than its royal counterpart, the extra flavor it adds to the card by existing is honestly just really cool. And taking the number 3 spot on this list, we have Archfiend Eccentric, the Pendulum Evolution and the light counterpart of Archfiend Eris. Eris actually has a relatively simple effect that can only be activated whenever it's destroyed by battle or card effect, which lets you add any Archfiend card from your deck to your hand except Eris itself. But Eccentric actually differs from Eris quite a bit with unique effects that work quite differently from her original counterpart. In the Pendulum scale, Eccentric lets you target another spell or trap card in the field, destroy both the card you targeted and Eccentric herself. As a monster, Eccentric lets you tribute it for cost to target another monster in the field to destroy it. Essentially, as a spell, Eccentric is removal for back row, and as a monster, she's removal for other monsters. At first glance, it appears that these effects don't really share any distinct relation, with Eris being a way to search out and start your plays, and Eccentric just being removal, with their only real commonality being their designs and archetype. But these two cards actually share a key theme in their effects because they both represent important moves when playing chess. Archfiend as an archetype encompasses a lot of different themes and ideas, being one of the biggest archetypes in the game that also happens to include Summoned Skull and Red Dragon Archfiend. But one of the themes the deck has returned to a couple of times is representing a chess game, with 2 different series of Archfiend monsters representing different pieces on the chessboard. In the second series, Eris represents the pawn that would eventually promote into the queen, with her effect being a reference to a gambit, a move where you sacrifice a piece in order to gain some kind of advantage. In chess, it will be in a better position, but in Yu-Gi-Oh, Eris was instead sacrificed by the likes of Infernity in order to add Infernity Archfiend from your deck to your hand. Eccentric carries these same ideas but is used in a completely different way, because each of her effects are instead used to trade 1-for-1 with your opponent's cards, which also just so happens to be another key component of chess, since you need to trade down your pieces of equal value with your opponent in order to reach an endgame. Eccentric lets you do this in 2 different ways, letting you trade off your Eccentric for an opponent's skill drain or TCBOO, trading a scale for a spell or trap. While as a monster, you're trading your Eccentric for an opponent's boss monster. The theme of trading 1-for-1 is precisely why Eccentric has been such a notable tool in Pendulum strategies throughout the years, since drawing it means you either have a decently strong skill to perform a Pendulum summon, or you can trade with your opponent's back row and interaction for free, making it a really versatile and solid inclusion in just about any Pendulum strategy. But even in non-Pendulum focused decks, Eccentric still sees a solid amount of play, and it's currently one of the best staples for Superheavy Samurai because it's a way to remove your opponent's spell and trap cards without putting a spell in your graveyard since it's technically counted as a monster. And speaking of Superheavy Samurai, and defending their title the number 2 spot on this list, we have Superheavy Samurai Monk Big Benkei, a strong part of the recent wave of Superheavy Samurai support that's actually based on the Superheavy's original boss monster, Superheavy Samurai Big Benkei. And as the deck's original boss monster, Big Benkei encapsulates Gongstrong's original heavy strong style, a type of dueling strategy taught by Gong's family and dojo that forgoes spell and trap cards entirely to focus on powerful defensive main deck monsters. Big Benkei shows off the power of the style with a whopping 3,500 defense, A relevant stat because not only can you change Benkei to defense position when it's summoned, it also allows all Super Heavy Samurai monsters, including itself, to declare attacks while in face-up defense position. But Super Heavy Samurai Monk Bin Benkei is actually incredibly different from its original form in both its scale and monster effect. Its monster effect can be activated if you don't have any spell trap cards in your graveyard, and lets you send the original Big Benkei from your hand or deck to the graveyard in order to special summon Monk Bin Benkei from your hand. With its only other effect being that when it's used as synchro material and added to the face-up extra deck, you can put Big Benkei to your Pendulum Zone. Which you want to do because if Monk Big Benkei is in the Pendulum scale while you control Super Heavy Samurai monster, you can add one Super Heavy Samurai Soul monster from your deck to your hand. These effects are definitely very different from its original counterpart, but there's a good reason for it. You see, in the anime, with Gong Strong's Heavy Strong style, the way that Super Heavy Samurai was initially played was by summoning Big Benkei to the field and then equipped with a bunch of different Super Heavy Samurai Soul monsters to give it various powerful effects, from defensive buffs to being able to attack twice and even protection from battle. This brought Gong a small amount of success, but this style of dueling wasn't enough to be able to keep up with the rapidly growing power and those around that played fusions, synchros, Xyzs, and pendulum strategies, as Gong would find out after narrowly managing to draw with Kit Blade, a synchro duelist. And as a result, Gong asked Kit to train him in the ways of synchro summoning, fusing it with his heavy strong style, making way for a new Super Heavy Samurai boss monster, Super Heavy Samurai Warlord Sasunowo, a boss monster that was even capable of pushing yugioh to his limits. This led to Big Benkei's role in the deck, both the anime and TCG, being a lot less prominent, as instead of relying on Big Benkei to finish games, you can just go into your easier to bring out synchro monsters that have more beneficial effects. Super Heavy Samurai Monk Big Benkei shows an understanding that Big Benkei is no longer the ultimate boss of the archetype, where you send the old ways of Super Heavies to the graveyard by foolishing Big Benkei to bring out Monk, a version of Big Benkei who lives a more peaceful life, even having dropped its effect to be able to attack while in defense position entirely. But even though Monk Bin Benkei is no longer a boss monster, it's an amazing enabler, and one that's centered entirely around supporting this newer heavy strong style. Its second monster effect incentivizes its use as synchro material, so that you can put it back into the scale later to form a pendulum summon. And in the Pendulum Zone, its effect is actually really cute as it references the original Big Benkei's affinity and playstyle with the Super Heavy Samurai Soul monsters, allowing you to add one of those equipped monsters to your hand. But instead of supporting Big Benkei, these cards you add are designed to help your other Super Heavy Samurai monsters instead. The effect is actually a linchpin of the Super Heavy Samurai engine because after you use the scale effect of Prodigy, you can place Monk Benkei into your scale, and then because you control Prodigy, you can use this effect to add whatever soul card you need at any given time. If you wanted an extra search for any Super Heavy Samurai monster, you could search for Soul Piercer to link it off. Or if you wanted to summon out a Super Heavy directly from your deck, you could grab Soul Peacemaker. Or if you wanted an extra extender, you can go into rank 4 or Synchro 8s without your normal summon, you can go for Soul Gaia Booster. Super Heavy Samurai Monk is one of the coolest evolutions in the game, because even though its effect is completely different from its original counterpart, it's one of the only examples of an evolution understanding how its own role has changed and gives way to new Super Heavy Samurai boss monsters, while it sits back in the scale supporting them peacefully. And it's really cute that this main way of getting into Big Benkei is with Prodigy, who's essentially a Super Heavy Samurai version of yugioh, showcasing the friendship between the two and how yugioh's strength as a duelist also inspired Gong's growth, as well as paved way for a new future for Super Heavy Samurai as a deck. And visiting from the stars at number 1 is Astrograph Sorcerer, one of the ace monsters of the antagonist of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5 series, Zark. Astrograph Sorcerer is a level 7 Dark Spellcaster monster with 2500 attack, which essentially made it Zark's version of Dark Magician. As a monster, it has 2 effects. The first can be activated in hand whenever a card you control is destroyed by battle or card effect, and lets you choose a monster in your graveyard, extra deck, or banished card that was destroyed this turn, then add one monster with the same name as that monster from your deck to your hand. But while Astrograph Sorcerer is on the field, you can activate its effect to banish it and a Pendulum Dragon, Xyz Dragon, Synchro Dragon, and Fusion Dragon monster from your hand, field, or graveyard to special summon out Supreme King Zark from your extra deck. This effect is meant to translate the way Astrograph worked in the anime over to the TCG, but Astrograph's Pendulum effect is actually entirely unique because, in the anime, Astrograph isn't a pendulum monster at all. It's actually just a regular effect monster. So Astrograph's Pendulum effect is entirely unique and is actually centered around supporting one of its original counterparts, Stargazer Magician, because this scale you can choose to destroy Astrograph Sorcerer to either place Stargazer Magician in your Pendulum Zone or special summon it. Now, Stargazer and Timegazer are among the first pendulum monsters ever made, so their effects are amazing, both in the scale and as monsters. But even with that being the case, there are some similarities between their effects and Astrograph's. Stargazer's monster effect, like Astrograph, triggers whenever a monster is removed from the field. In this case, it's whenever a pendulum monster is returned to the hand, which lets you summon the monster back to the field. While Timegazer's monster effect is based around stopping destruction, because the first time a card in the Pendulum Zone would be destroyed by an opponent's card effect, it's not destroyed. And as Pendulums, Stargazer and Timegazer have similar effects to one another. To activate Timegazer, you must control no monsters, and if a Pendulum monster battles your opponent, they can't activate trap cards until the end of the damage step. Stargazer can be activated at any time, and if a Pendulum monster you control battles your opponent, they can't activate spell cards instead. And both Stargazer and Timegazer became a scale 4 if you don't have a Magician or Odd Eyes card in your other scale. Like how Zark is the true form of Yuya, Yuto, Yugioh, and Yuri, Astrograph Sorcerer is supposed to represent the true combined form of Stargazer and Timegazer, who, like their owner, was split into multiple parts after Zark's first defeat at the hands of Rei Akaba. As a result, its primary monster effect is basically just a stronger version of Stargazer's effect, where instead of triggering when a card is returned to the hand, it triggers whenever a card is destroyed. Both let you restore the monster in some way, with Stargazer returning it to the field and Astrograph adding another copy of the monster to your hand. This link between the cards is a lot more apparent in the anime, where Astrograph lets you place the card that's destroyed back into the zone it was in before it got popped, instead of letting you add a card from your deck to your hand. But this change ended up being a huge benefit, and is part of the reason why Astrograph saw a ton of competitive play in the OCG and TCG and Pendulum-based strategies, because of its particular synergy with Heavy Metal Foe's Electromite. Because, with Electromite, you can add Astrograph Sorcerer to your face-up extra deck on its Link Summit, then pop a Pendulum scale you control to add the Astrograph Sorcerer from your extra deck to your hand, then use the effect of Astrograph in hand to summon it out, and add another card from your deck to your hand, which gave you a free search, a free body in the extra deck, and a Link monster with 2 downward pointing arrows, all of which were vital for Pendulum strategies after being nerfed by Master Rule 4. Now, Astrograph's other effects aren't really too relevant in the competitive metagame, but they are at least cute references to its original counterpart in role in the anime. Its Pendulum effects require Astrograph to be destroyed in order for Stargazer to be brought out, like how in the anime, Astrograph had to be split apart to birth the new magicians, while its second monster effect is precisely how Zark managed to fuse with the Dimension Dragons after turning evil, forming the Supreme King Zark to terrorize the world. With how powerful Astrograph Monster's effect is, it's no wonder he became the world's greatest duelist in the original dimension. And even in our world, Astrograph Sorcerer was deemed too powerful at 3 copies, and has spent a ton of time with the Forbidden Limited list for the absurd potential advantage this card can provide, since its search effect is not once per turn. And with the eventual release of the upcoming Zark support, as well as yet another Pendulum evolution of Astrograph, the Supreme King and his cards are only going to grow even stronger. Alright, and that's the list. If you know of any other Pendulum evolutions you may have missed, or have any ideas for future videos just like this one, please let us know down in the comments below.